need. Well, we quickly learned that that's not going to do it. What we learned was that we have to listen to the customer and what are their needs. And also, when you think about developing countries in the U.S., totally different, right? There is no FICO scores in developing countries. There is no bankruptcies. There is nothing like options like credit cards and family or friends. In developing countries, you either have or don't have money. In the U.S., we have pawn shops. We have money lenders. We have other things that our communities can go and take advantage of, or be taken advantage of. So what we've done in the very beginning was, like I said, started on the micro and developing country model, but changed it. What is the need of the consumer, the customer? Because it's the customer who is, again, right underneath the radar screen of the banks. So now, over time, since 1994, we started out with a $50,000 grant for operations from Levi Strauss, because at that time they still had a factory here in San Antonio, and loans from 4 banks: Broadway, Wells Fargo, Chase, and Frost. Between those 4 banks, we had $125,000 total in a loan pool at 0% interest. Okay? That first year, we put out about $100,000 in loans. Fast forward now, 23 years later, last year, we put out $30 million in loans in 1 year. We are now in 13 states. We have over 105 employees, and our loans range from $500 up to $500,000. However, 80% of our loans are under $50,000, right? Because we're still, that is really where the greatest need is. And we continue to educate as well. Not only access to capital, but also access to the technical assistance that small business person needs. So 80% of the businesses that we help are still in business. Statistics show that in small businesses die within the first 3 years. So because we match both access to capital with technical assistance, we're able then to provide success for that small business owner and their families. So one of the loans that we made back in 1994, the Garces family here in San Antonio, they have a welding company down on Tarzamora Street. Now the dad has passed it on to Linda, so it's given it to that next generation. So we're excited, we're proud that we've been able to sustain that family and that business and everything else that we've done. So we are grateful for the investors that we've had. The Carnivore Sisters in Corpus are investors, the Adrian Dominican Sisters are investors, the Oblates are investors, and we're talking not 5 figures here, 6 and 7 figures individually, these congregations. The Episcopal Church is an investor, and the Sacred Heart priest up in Chicago are investors in us. So the point is that by investing in us, it's not going to be FDIC insured, but at the end of the day, we've not defaulted on any loans or investments that we've received. And obviously, the religious congregations get preferable treatment because they get 1% more than everybody else. So that's one of the ways that we can be able to have a win-win situation. So with that, Father, I'll turn it over.
Thank you. Well, I want to say first what a deep honor and a privilege it is to be invited to be with you all tonight. Thank you, Anna, for extending the invitation, and I'm glad that I didn't have class on Thursday and last night. So. I'm not sure, though, that if I had known the qualifications of the rest of the panel that I would have accepted that invitation. I sort of feel a little bit like the ugly stepsister in Cinderella up here. I have the hope that my ideas, which are mostly academic in origin rather than originating in a real practice, fighting the world's problems on the front line of faith-based, real activism. I just don't know for sure that my academic ideas are going to fit too well into that glass slipper of commitment to the cause of improving capitalism, but I hope they will, and you'll be the judge of that when I get to the end of this. Father Finn asked me to focus my remarks on the themes or topics of most concern in the fields of finance and economics since the 2008 onset of the Great Recession. And I've decided to couch those in terms of my own fears and worries, but not try to necessarily put them in any particular order of importance. The first thing I'm going to list is a historical event, which I think still has huge ramifications that are unfolding, maybe most recently in this election we had, but certainly it's going to unfold a lot further. And that dismay is at the free speech rights having been granted to corporations. In spite of the importance of the business community in the world, I'm really, in my worst nightmares, afraid at some point there's going to be a constitutional case that grants them a vote in elections as well as the ability to spend all their money. I really think that when the Supreme Court made its Citizens United decision in 2009, that it recast the character of our political landscape and of our democracy ever more fully to be a money drives all process. And I'm not sure that that's healthy for the preservation of a meaningful democracy. So that's sort of out of my field, maybe. You might say I'm encroaching into political science, but because it's corporations that are involved in this, it really worries me a great deal. Second thing on my list is the frustration I feel at the growing size of the typical corporation. And this doesn't matter whether you talk about market power based on the percentage of the sales that they have in their industry, or whether you talk about the size of the company based on its sales, or the size based on the market capitalization, that's the numbers of shares outstanding times share price. I'm saying that because I'm a teacher, not because you don't know it, okay? I'm used to saying that in my classes, you all know that. But anyway, there are far fewer corporations now than there were 40 years ago when I started teaching. I mean, I think we were looking at like 9,000 U.S. publicly traded corporations in 1977 when I stepped foot in the economics classroom. And now we have somewhere around 4,000 to 4,500, something like that, publicly traded U.S.-based corporations. So we're, about half as many. And that means that typically the corporate sizes are much larger now, and not just because the economy has grown since then. This resulted from a lot more and more mergers, and I think it's also been because there have been fewer and fewer startups that have succeeded, especially since 2008. We've had a significant rise in the formation of nonprofits in that time frame, but far fewer businesses that have been constituted as profitable enterprises. And as a result of this lack of competition and bigger size, I think companies have a lot more freedom to pad their costs with less productive expenditures. And one of those I would list is campaign expenditures, honestly. Campaign contributions and by corporations are pretty significant now as a way of funding our campaign process. And that leads me into the next concern I have, and that is significantly lower economic growth. And you saw this on the slides, and we've already mentioned that by some of the other commentators and Father Finn here. But I really think that economic growth rates are potentially linked to the low productivity rates that we've experienced lately, or low growth rates of productivity, I should say, in the workforce. But it might also be due to the financial resources of the economy being tied up in cash on the balance sheets of so many companies. I mean, if you look back at the total amount of cash on the balance sheets of corporations in the U.S. now, in spite of the fact that there are so many fewer of them, the amount of cash as a percentage of their total assets is larger than it's been at any time since World War II. And the main reason they had so much cash at the end of World War II is because the government paid them for all the stuff they had manufactured. They didn't really have anything to spend it on then because of rationing and so on. And not an ability to put new stuff in place at the end of World War II when we were downsizing. I think that cash on the balance sheet of a corporation is truly an idle asset, except for banks. Okay? I mean, you have to have it. You have to have it. But for other companies, they're supposed to be producing goods and services for our economy. It is an idle asset. And that acts as a drag. We hope it's going to be a short-term one, but I don't know. This has been going on for a long time now. I can remember when I taught finance and the first time I moved from economics over to finance in the fall of 2000 or 2001, I can remember at the time that Microsoft Corporation had $40 billion in cash on its balance sheet, and in 2000, that was a lot of money. If you remember correctly, they were facing an antitrust lawsuit from the Clinton administration Justice Department, which was at Microsoft's throats in the settlement talks for that, because they were trying to settle out of court. Microsoft pulled out of those talks right before the fall election. George Bush was ultimately declared the winner of that election, and maybe his policy was wise, but once the Supreme Court sided with his moving into the White House, his Justice Department settled that lawsuit for $100 million when the Clinton administration was negotiating for 10 times that amount. Now, there was also an antitrust lawsuit going on at exactly the same time against Microsoft in the European Union. That was not settled until about 4 or 5 years later, and it was somewhere between $4 and $5 billion that Microsoft paid there. But they had that big war chest of $40 billion to try to face these lawsuits, not only the antitrust lawsuits from those government entities, but also the private lawsuits that were going to follow from the shareholders of those companies that they had unmercifully driven out of business by those, I think, illegal, although, you know, the settlement out of court never pleads to the illegalness of it. They did face lawsuits after that. But the fact that they have all this cash now, it's really a drag on the productivity, because it's not being invested in additional capital, whether it's human capital investments for worker training, or whether it's machinery or computerization or updated software and so on. The companies are just not spending as much on that as I think we'd like to see them spend. The fourth thing on my list is the skewed income distribution. I mean, I'm really distressed over this. I think it results a great deal from the fact that we have so many fewer corporations now. When the numbers of companies were smaller, then the company size on average will have increased, and there's fewer people holding jobs at the middle management or upper management levels. And of course, because these fewer corporations got into existence in the first place through mergers, you know, I can't remember a time when a merger resulted in a direct, immediate increase in employment at those merged companies. It's always the other direction. It's layoffs that happen. And some of those people, if there are not new companies taking the place of the ones that have merged together, they're not going to find a place to use those middle management and higher level skills without a long, hard search. And so the time frame for unemployment of the average worker tends to get longer in an economy that's not generating new companies as rapidly. And finally, well, almost finally, my fifth worry is that the movement to exchange-traded index funds is likely to sever or further divorce the ownership of corporate assets from the responsibility for the appropriate use of those assets. Now, I know that this began already when we had the creation of mutual funds, because the companies no longer knew who their owners were actually. I mean, I own all kinds of companies just through my pension plan, and I never get the proxies to vote on those, okay? Somebody at the mutual fund is doing that. But at least I own the mutual fund, and I know who to hold accountable to the mutual fund. If I go out and buy an exchange-traded fund like the S&P 500 index, the spider fund or something like that, they send me proxies to vote for their board, and I'm thinking, okay, now, they're just nothing but an index fund. What do I care? I mean, they don't have any control over how much the earnings are. They don't have any control over what dividends get accounted. I mean, so why should I bother? I mean, I'm re-electing them, or maybe maybe all I'm doing is just proving who the auditors are or something like that. You just sort of shake it off and just never bother to vote those shares, right? You just say, oh, okay, there's a few people who will be responsible to vote this. I don't need to do it. So I think exchange-traded funds has made us another level away from the owners of the capital actually answering somehow to the rest of the public and to the management, holding management's feet to the fire. Okay, and then I get to my own field. What about the teaching of economics? I really fear that for most of our students, the way we teach economics in the United States is really too abstract to be very meaningful. I mean, they'll find a few things that they can apply later on. But I think in higher education in general, that many of our fields stray sometimes until and unless we can get the students back into an internship or something at the junior or senior year. It's really hard, especially in economics, it's hard for us not to teach these models with some conviction that they're really correct, right? I mean, an economic model of free markets, how can that be correct when there isn't one we can point to and say this is really a free market, right? But we sell that as some kind of a big, you know, almost an idol, I guess, that we're after somehow. And the problem is that when we teach that without an ethical reflection piece of that course, and when we teach it without a sense of the market being a servant of human society, instead of maybe as some of us feel like it's just an abstract power that others use to manipulate us or manipulate the natural world for the pursuit of pure profit. If we don't teach those models with a sense of humility, if we don't teach those models with a strong ethical kind of grounding and a determination that this is to serve people and the creation rather than the other way around, then I think we're really guiding our students down maybe the wrong pathway, or at least not holding them back a little bit. They're likely to believe that it's fine, or even worse, that it's an indication of their being blessed by God, if they engage in a life of accumulation of wealth as an end in itself. This, we know, is surely not the route to happiness and fulfillment, even for them, and so much more painful for the less wealthy, even poor in resources among us, who are going to have to live with the consequences of that quest. I have other things that I could talk about too. I mean, labor force participation rates and so on is a whole other topic, but I'm afraid I'm going to get cut off here in a minute, so I'm going to stop here and let you all interact with Father Finn. Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure the three of you are aware that we've got more than one treasurer from a religious institution in the group. And those are the most prized after positions in religious congregations. I'm suppose you know that as well. Because we go through very rigorous training in order to prepare for those positions over the years. And I'm sure you'll hear from some of those in a minute. But I'm curious, in terms of either your customers at the bank or your clients with LiftFund or your students, what are some of the anxieties that they face? What are they? We hear a lot about economic, financial illiteracy. We know that nobody balances their checkbook anymore, and they think that their iPhone does that for them as well. They hope that somebody will send them a report at some point to tell them how much in debt they are. But what are some of the practical pressing issues that people who...
Just pressing it right there.
Clients, customers,
you go first.
I mean, what presses up and what are their concerns given the current state of economic activity in the U.S. or in Southwest?
Well, the small business owners that come to us, or the people that want to start a small business, are shocked when we don't want to, or we cannot lend them money, because they've got this great idea. And so, you know, it's teaching them to be good stewards of these dollars that they're about to receive. So, you know, for example, you know, somebody comes in and says, I love to eat cookies, I want to open up a bakery. So what we've got to say to them, okay, why don't you go work at a bakery for a while and be able to see how it runs and so on, so that they have that practical experience and then come back and ask for the money. And then and the small business owners as well, they're the ones that are more established. I think right now specifically, they're kind of at wait and see what happens in terms of our economy right now. They're not willing to take a lot of chances, but at the same time, they also see opportunities, and so we have to weigh these things. And it's not only here in San Antonio, but a lot in our rural communities, because rural communities are having a harder time nowadays, especially down in South Texas, and you know, after all the fracking stuff, and you know, people they thought this was going to be around for a long time, and it just is not. It is not. And so how do we help them maneuver through these hard times that are happening right now in these poor communities like Alice, and, you know, down in just even Corpus Christi and some of those areas that are having a hard time right now. So I guess from the business person's perspective, they also want more than we're able to offer them. And so it's making sure that we hold their hand as we go down that path together. So it's not going to be all in one chunk, but they'll take a little chunk, pay it back, take another chunk.
Thanks. I want to just kind of build upon what Janie said here, because as with LiftFund, as they really partner with people and hold their hand, that's what I'm seeing that people need. One of the things that they need is they need really a financial partnership. And so oftentimes we have people come in and they will either apply for a loan or this or that, and we'll have to say, not yet. But let us, yeah, exactly, yeah. And so if it's a home, we can work with lower credit scores through our Community Reinvestment Act, and we just really beefed that up in the last few years to help people do that. And the folks we have on board are very passionate about trying to get people in homes, because we find that it creates a more stable environment for children and for families, and really creates a better atmosphere in which to grow up. But it is true, at other times, we have to say, we need you to go to another partner in the community like LiftFund. And one of the things I'm reminded is that we serve a relational God, and when you think about the Trinity, it consists of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And there's this beautiful kind of synchronicity of giving and receiving. And so we have to operate that way as well if we're going to bring the kingdom here on earth. And that we have to know our seat at the table. For instance, my seat as a bank is different than Janie's as a LiftFund, or as Dr. Citzler's in education, or Séamus within his advocacy efforts. And so we do have to work together. And so a couple of things I see in that when people come is they really need for us to address the whole person. And that's one thing that we encourage folks to do, is we say, you might be able to go out and get a little bit better interest rate online, or you might be able to go out and get a couple more basis points on an investment. But we want to work with you in the whole person. We want to work with you in a long-term relationship. And since we're all created to be relational, what we find is, rather than the corporate mentality, as I mentioned earlier, let's do a transaction and make money, let's make profits, we need to back up and say, how do we get to know that person, the whole person? How do we help not only in this season, but in the next season and in the next generation to improve their life? And then how do we as a corporation really put that value into place and put feet on it, as opposed to just profits, and really stand by that during the day-to-day and those type of things. And let's see,